The servant's gloved hand closed around the coffin lid before the rector had finished the final prayer. From behind the organ screen, Camilla Pembroke watched Augustus, Duke of Stonehaven, lift the lid at her funeral and reveal nothing but cream satin and air. Violetta Sinclair did not scream until the whole church had seen what she had tried to bury. The cry tore through St. Bartholomew's like a knife through black silk. It rose above the rector's broken prayer, above the frightened rustle of veils, above the low gasp of half the county discovering that a dead girl had failed to stay dead. Camilla did not move. She stood hidden in the narrow shadow behind the organ loft, one hand pressed to the carved wood, the other curled tight around a tiny brass key. The key was sewn to a strip of black mourning ribbon and hidden inside her sleeve. She pressed it into her palm until the edge bit. Do not come down yet. Let them look. Let them see the empty coffin first. The church smelled of melting wax, cold stone, and lilies. Too many lilies. Violetta had ordered white lilies in great choking masses piled beside the coffin, looped around the altar rail, set in tall silver vases, as if grief could be bought by the dozen. Below Camilla, the county elite sat in their dark coats and heavy veils, every face turned toward the open mahogany coffin. There was no body. There were no folded hands, no white burial gown, no poor, pale niece carried off by fever. Only satin. Only air. Thieves! Violetta shrieked. Her mourning veil had slipped sideways, exposing one furious eye. Someone has stolen her! The fever took her mind, and now monsters have taken her corpse. A woman sobbed. Someone crossed himself. The rector clutched his prayer book so hard the leather bent. Camilla breathed once. Short, quiet, measured. That was all she allowed herself. Her gaze stayed on the tall man in the plain black servant's coat. Augustus Stonehaven had entered by the side aisle with his head bent, carrying himself just low enough to pass as a footman to those who did not look properly. But Camilla had looked. Even in borrowed livery, he did not stand like a servant. He stood like a storm, held upright by bone. The coat strained across his shoulders. Dust marked one sleeve. His dark hair was damp from the mist outside, his jaw locked so tightly that a muscle ticked beneath the skin. He was not staring into the coffin as the others did. He was looking at Violetta, then the rector, then the mourners. He had not come to pay respects. He had come to stop a burial. Camilla had not known whether anyone would come. She had sat in the vestry through the morning bells, listening to the scrape of men setting the coffin on its trestles. She had heard the servants whispering about fever madness, tragedy. She had heard Violetta instruct the rector's clerk to keep the service brief because the sight would distress the family. Family. The word had almost made Camilla laugh in the dark. Then the side door had opened, and a man in servant's black had walked down the aisle. Augustus turned his head now. His dark eyes swept the nave, the side chapels, the pillars, the curtained alcoves. Then they rose. For one fraction of a second, his gaze caught the wooden fretwork of the organ screen. Camilla froze. She did not shrink back. She did not lift a hand. She only held his gaze through the narrow carved gap. His fury did not vanish. It sharpened. He let go of the coffin lid. The funeral was over. The hunt had begun. Camilla stepped away from the screen and slipped down the narrow stone stair at the rear of the organ loft. The stairwell was cold and airless, tasting of dust and old damp. Her boots found each worn step by memory. At the bottom, she crossed the passage toward the west vestry, moving quickly, but not running. Running belonged to frightened girls. Violetta had counted on frightened girls. Camilla reached the heavy oak door. She pulled the brass key free of the mourning ribbon and slid it into the lock. The mechanism turned with a thick, oiled click. She stepped inside the tiny, windowless room and shut herself in. Darkness closed around her. She stood in the center of the vestry, spine-straight hands clasped before her, waiting. It did not take long. Heavy boots struck the stone passage outside. Fast. Too fast for the rector, too controlled for Violetta's men. The steps stopped before the door. The handle rattled. Camilla did not speak. "Open it," a man commanded from the other side. The voice was low, rough, and furious enough to shake through the wood. She closed her fingers around the key. No, not yet. A heavy impact slammed into the door. Dust rained from the lintel. The frame groaned. Another blow followed harder. Ancient timber cracked around the iron lockbox. He was not going to ask twice. With a deafening splinter, the door burst inward and struck the stone wall. Augustus stood in the threshold, chest heaving, the servant's coat white with dust from the broken frame. In the thin corridor light, the hard planes of his face looked carved by anger. He looked dangerous. He looked ready to tear down the church, stone by stone. Then he saw her. He stopped dead. The breath left him in a harsh sound. Camilla stood upright in the middle of the vestry. She wore a faded grey wool dress, not a burial gown. Her hair was pinned badly because her fingers had shaken too much to do it neatly. Her face was pale with exhaustion, and the small dose of opium Violetta had managed to get into her tea still left a bitter weight in her limbs. But she did not sway. "You are alive," Augustus said. It was not a question. It was a fact dragged over broken glass. "I am," Camilla answered. He crossed the room in 2 strides. His gloved hands closed around her shoulders. The grip was hard, anchoring, almost desperate. Heat came off him in waves, shocking in the freezing room. "I will kill her," he said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "I will break her neck in front of the altar. Come." He turned, pulling her toward the passage. Camilla dug her heels into the stone. "Stop!" He looked back at her, eyes blazing. "We are leaving. Now. Before her men find you." "If I walk out of this church with you," Camilla said, "she wins." His brows drew together. "She buried an empty coffin. And what will she say when she sees the broken door?" Camilla asked. Her voice was flat, because anything else would have broken. "She will say I was abducted. Or she will say I went mad from fever, staged the empty coffin, and fled into the arms of a duke. She will have her scandal. She will have proof that I cannot be trusted." A sharp voice cut down the passage. "Check the vestry! The door is open! Violetta's men!" Augustus cursed under his breath. His hand tightened once on Camilla's shoulder, then released. The impulse to fight showed in every line of him, the clenched fists, the rigid back, the savage turn of his head toward the approaching voices. But he looked at her face, pale, still, resolved. The impulse fractured. He stepped back into the shadow of the vestry and drew her with him, this time more carefully. "There is a carriage in the trees behind the churchyard," he said. "Mine, not hers. We go through the window." Camilla looked at the small, high window above the chest. It was narrow, but unbarred. Rain misted against the glass. She nodded once. He moved toward her, as if to lift her. "No," she said. The word was quiet, but it stopped him. Augustus stared. Camilla climbed onto the wooden chest herself. Her skirts caught on a nail. She freed them with one sharp tug. She braced her hands on the sill and pulled herself up. The movement sent a wave of sickness through her, but she swallowed it down. She had been drugged, locked away, and declared dead. She would not be carried out like property. Augustus said nothing. He only stood below the window with his arms raised. When she dropped into the wet grass outside, his hands caught her waist for one brief, burning second. He steadied her, then let go. They moved through the graveyard, past leaning stones and sodden bracken. The church behind them roared with panic. Voices called. A bell clanged once, then stopped. The mist soaked Camilla's wool dress until it clung to her knees. She did not shiver. She listened to the rhythm of her boots on the earth. He had broken the door. He had not broken her. The carriage waited beneath the trees, half hidden by dripping branches. Augustus opened the door and stepped back at once, giving her room to enter without being touched. Camilla climbed inside, gathering her wet skirts with hands that no longer felt fully her own. Only when she was seated did Augustus follow. He sat opposite her. Rain hammered the roof. The horses lurched forward. For several minutes neither spoke. The closed carriage smelled of damp leather, cold wool, and the fury Augustus was holding so tightly it seemed to heat the air between them. Camilla's body betrayed her at last. One tremor passed through her shoulders, then another. Augustus saw it. His hand moved toward the cloak folded beside him, then stopped before it crossed the space between them. He took the cloak and laid it on the seat between them instead, not around her, not over her knees, within reach. Camilla looked at the cloak, then at him. His face was still hard, still burning with the need to turn the carriage around and drag Violetta by the throat through the church aisle. But he did not move closer. He did not make her small by fussing over her cold. He only waited. After a moment, Camilla took the cloak herself and drew it around her shoulders. Augustus looked away at once, as if even watching her accept warmth felt like a liberty. Something in her chest shifted. Not soft, not safe, but less alone. The hunting lodge stood deep in the Essex woods on Stonehaven land, half hidden by oak and wet bracken. It was smaller than Camilla expected, built of old stone and dark timber, with narrow windows and smoke already trailing from one chimney. A groom came running as the carriage stopped. Augustus jumped down first. "Send to the north gate," he ordered. "No one enters without my word. Wake Mrs. Hale and her daughter. They are to attend Miss Pembroke at once. And send a rider for Mr. Humphrey Gresham, the Chancery Clerk in Chelmsford. Tell him it concerns the Pembroke Trust and a false death." The groom vanished into the rain. Camilla stood at the carriage step, one hand on the door. She'd not asked for a housekeeper, but she understood why he had summoned one. A young, unmarried woman under a duke's roof could be ruined by the same mouth that claimed to protect her. Augustus had remembered that before she had needed to say it. The knowledge unsettled her more than his fury. Inside the lodge hall was dark and low-ceilinged. A servant hurried to light the fire. The smell of damp wool wood smoke and old leather filled the air. Camilla stepped over the threshold, water dripping from her hem, and stopped in the center of the hall. Augustus threw off the wet servant's coat. Without the disguise, even in shirt sleeves and a dark waistcoat, he seemed too large for the room, too full of motion, a man who gave an order and expected the world to obey. Camilla had just seen how easily the world obeyed people with money, names, and documents. Her own aunt had killed her on paper before the county had finished breakfast. "You will take the master chamber upstairs," Augustus said. "There is a lock on the inside. Until Mrs. Hale arrives, my man will stand in the passage. No one will approach. No, Camilla said. He stopped. No. I am not a guest, Your Grace. Her hands stayed clasped to hide the tremor in her fingers.
And I am not your captive. His expression changed. Not softened, not yet, but sharpened into a tension. You are freezing, he said. You have just survived your own funeral. I need to know who holds the key to the master chamber. I do. Then I will take it. A beat passed. The fire caught in the hearth with a low crackle. And Camilla continued, I require paper, ink, and the account books of the Pembroke Estate Trust. If your rider can reach Mr. Gresham before morning, he will know which clerk kept the copies. Augustus looked at her for a long moment. She did not ask for a blanket. She asked for a weapon. Slowly, he reached into his waistcoat pocket and removed a brass key larger than hers. He laid it on the hall table, then pushed it toward her with 2 fingers. The chamber key, he said. Camilla picked it up. Only then did she allow herself to sit. Mrs. Hale arrived within the hour, grey-haired, sharp-eyed, and too practical to waste time fainting over scandal. Her daughter brought hot water, dry linen, and a dark wool wrapper. Camilla accepted the dry clothing, the locked room, and the housekeeper's solid presence outside the door. She did not sleep. By midnight, she was in the library with a candle burning low beside her. Papers covered the desk. Her handwriting moved across them in neat, precise lines, each sentence narrow as a stitch. The black mourning ribbon lay beside the inkstand, the small vestry key tied to it. Augustus opened the front door himself when the knock came. A man in a dripping cloak stepped inside. Humphrey Gresham was thin, elderly, and soaked through. He had once served Camilla's father in chancery matters and possessed the rare gift of making legal clauses sound less dead than the people who abused them. Miss Pembroke, he breathed, removing his wet hat. Thank God. His Grace's message found me at the inn, Humphrey Camilla said, rising. His face was grey. That was when she knew the news was worse than rain. I bring foul word, he said. Mrs. Sinclair has already sent a petition toward London. By morning, her solicitor will attempt to enter it. She claims you are alive, but dangerously disordered. She says the funeral was a delusion of your fevered mind, that you contrived it yourself and fled in a fit. Augusta stood by the door, arms folded. Madness. Not merely the word, Humphrey said quietly. The machinery. If she persuades the court to issue a commission against you, she may gain control over your person and the charitable trust. She may place you in a private house of confinement while the matter is examined. Once behind those doors, Miss Pembroke, a sane woman, may spend years proving she is not mad. The library went very still. Rain ticked against the window. Camilla had expected Violetta to lie. She had not expected the lie to travel so quickly. For a moment, the candle flame blurred. Then she sat again. Humphrey, she said, pulling a fresh sheet of paper toward her. Recite the clauses governing the transfer of the school funds. From memory, begin with my father's codicil of March 1812. Augustus turned his head sharply. Humphrey blinked. Then, with a clerk's instinct stronger than shock, he began. Camilla wrote. Her hand moved steadily. Date, clause, witness, account, discrepancy. She left a small blank beside each legal assertion for the proof that must answer it. She wrote down the names of servants dismissed after questioning the fever. She wrote down the date Violetta had first forbidden the village physician to call. She wrote down the sum missing from the school fund.
Augustus began to pace. His boots struck the floorboards in hard, restless turns. After the fourth turn, he stopped. Camilla did not look up, but she felt the change.
He crossed to the side table, poured a glass of water, and set it silently beside her elbow. Then he drew a chair to the opposite side of the desk and sat. He did not ask what she needed. He did not order her to rest. He faced the door, guarding it, quietly. Camilla's quill paused. She looked at the glass, then at the Duke, who had forced himself into stillness because her work required silence. He had adjusted to her. The knowledge slipped beneath her ribs, small and dangerous. Silence was no longer empty. It had become a form of being seen. By noon the next day, Violetta's threat came in a carriage. Camilla stood at the library window and watched the vehicle grind into the muddy yard. Thorn. Violetta's steward climbed down first, heavy-faced and sour. Behind him came a thin physician carrying a black leather bag. Augustus was beside the window in a heartbeat. The heat came off him instantly. "They brought a physician to examine you," he said. His hand dropped to the hilt of his sword. "I will throw them both into the river." He turned toward the door. His body was already moving. "Augustus!" It was the first time she had used his Christian name. The sound cracked through his fury, like a struck bell. He stopped with one hand on the latch. Camilla stood by the desk, aligning her papers into a neat stack. She placed the black mourning ribbon on top. The little brass key gleamed dully in the grey light. "If you strike him," she said, "they will say you are as disordered as I am. They will say you hold me here by force. I am protecting you." "No," she said softly. "You are reacting." The words landed. His jaw tightened until she thought it must hurt. "Hold the door," Camilla said. Nothing more. For several seconds he did not move. Every instinct in him was a drawn blade. She could see it in the angle of his shoulders, the white pressure of his knuckles, the violence he was forcing back into his own bones. Then he released the sword hilt. He opened the door. Thorn had reached the porch. "Your Grace, we have reason to believe you are harboring—" "State your name and business," Augustus said, "or I will have my men take you up for trespass on ducal land." Thorn faltered. The physician took one careful step backward. "We come on behalf of Mrs. Sinclair," Thorn said. "The young lady is unwell. She must be examined." "Mrs. Sinclair has no authority here." "She is the lady's guardian. She was," Augustus said. His voice did not rise. That made it more dangerous. "She is now a woman who declared a living heiress dead before witnesses. Return to her. Tell her that if she sends another man to force entry onto Stonehaven land, I will bring the matter before every magistrate in Essex before nightfall." Thorn tried to peer around him. Augustus shifted half an inch. It was enough to make the steward step down from the porch. The door closed in his face. Augustus threw the bolt and stood there, breathing hard. Camilla had not moved. "It was difficult," she said. He looked back. What was not hitting him? A rough laugh almost escaped him. It failed before it became sound. He walked to the hearth and braced both hands on the mantel. "When my sister was 18, he said, staring into the flames, her guardian arranged a marriage to a man who had already sold half her jewels to pay gaming debts. I was young enough to believe speed was rudeness and patience was virtue. I waited for lawyers. I waited for letters. I waited for proper channels." His shoulders rose once. By the time I broke her door, she had taken laudanum. She was already cold. Camilla's breath caught. The room changed around him. The violence was still there,
the temper, the dangerous speed. But beneath it lay something more terrible than anger. Fear. He broke doors because waiting had once become a grave. "You did not know," Camilla said. "No," Augustus answered,
and knowing that has never made me forgive myself. That night, the storm broke over the lodge. Rain lashed the windows. Lightning showed the library in pale flashes. Shelves, desk, hearth. The black ribbon looped beside Camilla's papers. Mrs. Hale and her daughter slept in the small chamber across the passage. Humphrey dozed in a chair near the kitchen fire, spectacles slipping down his nose. Camilla sat on the edge of the library sofa. Augustus sat in the armchair opposite. 5 feet separated them. Less in every way that mattered. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "The coffin." He nodded. Camilla looked down at her hands. The restraint she had worn for 3 days had become heavier than wet wool. "She drugged me," she said. "Opium in my tea. I knew the taste. My father took laudanum for pain in his last winter, and the bitterness never left the cup, no matter how much honey the nurse stirred into it." Augustus went very still. "Violetta watched me drink," Camilla continued. "So I drank enough to wet my mouth, enough to make my limbs heavy. When she turned to scold the maid for spilling wax on the tray, I tipped the rest into the rushes beneath my chair." Her fingers tightened. She thought grief had made me clumsy. She thought I had swallowed it all. "You let her believe you were senseless." "Yes." The confession came out flat. It still tasted of fear. She told the servants I had brain fever. When I woke properly, I was in the vestry, locked in. I could hear them in the nave arranging flowers. Augustus leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He did not interrupt. "I still had the small vestry key," Camilla continued. "I had sewn it into my mourning ribbon after my father died. Violetta never knew. She thought I kept it for sentiment." Her mouth tightened. She always mistook sentiment for weakness. The fire cracked. "If I had broken the window and run," Camilla said, "who would have believed me? I would have been a wild, drugged girl wandering the roads. She would have had me confined before dark." "So you stayed?" "I waited until the gravediggers had set the coffin on the trestles and gone for ale. She had weighted it with flat churchyard stones beneath the satin, so the men would not question the burden. Once it was in the church, no one meant to lift it again until burial." A faint tremor crossed her hand. She closed it into a fist until it stopped. I forced the lid open. I took the stones out one by one and hid them beneath the vestry coal scuttle. I nearly fainted twice. But the lock on the west door was old, and the clerk had left the passage empty. Her voice lowered. Then I climbed to the organ loft and waited. Augustus stared at her. Not with pity. That would have wounded her. He stared as though he had just understood the size of the courage in the room. "You sat through your own funeral," he said. "Yes. To trap her. To make the lie public enough that she could not bury it quietly." The storm pressed against the windows. Camilla raised her eyes to his. "You break doors because waiting once broke you," she said. "But if you break this one before I turn the key, she will call it rescue. She will make it another prison." He absorbed the blow without flinching. "I understand," he said. The simplicity of it nearly undid her. Not, "I will protect you," not, "You need not fear," not, "Leave it to me." Only, "I understand." Camilla swallowed. Her throat tightened painfully.
The silence she had kept so carefully cracked at last. "I was afraid," she whispered. One tear slipped free, hot and humiliating. She did not wipe it away quickly enough. "I sat in the dark," she said, "and I was afraid no one would come, that they would bury the box and go home to supper." Augustus rose, slowly. No lunge, no command, no sweeping her into arms she had not offered herself to. He crossed the space and knelt before her. Then he held out his hand. Camilla looked at it. Large, strong, dangerous if turned the wrong way. Open now. She placed her cold fingers in his. He folded his hand around hers, as if taking an oath. "I came," he said, "and I will not walk away." 3 days later, Violetta Sinclair made her public move. Before the Chancery matter could be heard in London, she gathered local gentry in the Grand Assembly Room of Pembroke Hall. It was meant to be a show of grief, outrage, and respectability. A preemptive funeral for Camilla's reputation. Augustus and Camilla arrived unannounced. The double doors opened. Conversation died. The Duke of Stonehaven walked in first, no longer disguised. He wore a dark coat cut with severe elegance, his boots still marked by road mud, his face hard enough to silence men who had meant to whisper. The crowd parted. At the front of the room, Violetta stood beside a long table. On it lay the splintered pieces of the vestry doorframe. Camilla understood at once. Violetta had made an exhibit of Augustus's violence. Beside her stood Estella Marsden, Violetta's niece, wearing a heavy pearl brooch at her throat. Camilla stopped breathing. The brooch had belonged to Camilla's mother. She had not seen it since the week after her father's burial. He broke the church to take her. Violetta was saying, one black-gloved hand lifted toward the broken wood. A tragic, hysterical girl, seduced into a grotesque scandal by a man who values his own will above God's house. Augustus's temper surged so visibly that several people stepped back. "You lying, Augustus." One word. Quiet. From the doorway behind him, he froze. Then he looked over his shoulder. Camilla stepped out from the shadow of the hall. She wore the same grey wool dress, cleaned and pressed. No jewels, no veil, no fan to hide behind. Around her wrist, the black ribbon was tied openly, the brass vestry key resting against her pulse. The room saw her, all at once. The ghost returned in daylight. A roar of whispers broke, then collapsed into silence as she walked to the center of the floor. Every step cost her. Her knees still remembered opium. Her lungs still remembered the locked vestry. But she did not lower her head. Augustus remembered. He did not shout. He did not draw a weapon. He stepped aside and placed himself before the main exit, a dark, immovable line between Camilla and anyone who might touch her. Then he yielded the room. Camilla looked at Violetta. "I am not dead," she said clearly. "And I am not mad." Violetta's face blanched beneath its powder. Camilla's gaze moved to the pearl brooch. "That belonged to my mother," she said. "You will remove it before the London hearing. I will not have stolen things worn as mourning." A sound passed through the room. Not quite a gasp, not quite applause. Something better. Recognition. For one instant, Violetta looked not wicked, not grand, not bereaved. Only caught. Camilla turned to the assembled county. "My aunt may tell this tale as often as she likes," she said. "I will tell it once, under oath." Then She walked out. Augustus fell into step behind her. He had not rescued her from the room. He had made sure the room could not swallow her. The Chancery Court in London smelled of old parchment, damp wool, candle smoke, and fear. The gallery was packed. The story of the empty coffin had travelled faster than any respectable person would admit to enjoying. Every bench held faces turned toward the pale young woman at the front, and the imposing Duke seated directly behind her. Camilla sat at the petitioner's table, with Humphrey on one side and a stack of papers tied in ribbon before her. Augustus sat behind her chair, not beside her, not in front, behind, where he could be seen and where he would not take the floor unless the truth required it. A court officer called the matter. The judge looked down through his spectacles. The court will hear the petition concerning the competency of Miss Camilla Pembroke and the administration of the Pembroke Charitable Trust. Violetta's barrister rose first. He was smooth. Too smooth. He spoke of delicacy, feminine nerves, fevered imagination, religious disturbance, and the sad necessity of protection. He never once said money, though every word smelled of it. My lord, he concluded, only a mind gravely disordered would contrive an empty coffin, hide in a vestry, and allow her own family to mourn before the county. Camilla sat still. Her hands were folded. The black ribbon and brass key were visible at her wrist. She could feel the court looking at them. The judge turned to her. Miss Pembroke, your guardian claims you are unfit to manage your person or the trust established by your father. How do you answer? Camilla stood. She did not look at Augustus. She did not look at Violetta. She looked at the judge. I answer with facts, my lord. Her voice carried, not loudly, clearly. She began with her father's will, the date, the codicil, the clause preserving the school funds for village girls who could not pay for instruction. She named the account ledgers, the missing sums, the rents diverted, the dismissed servants. The physician refused entry. The tea served to her the night before the funeral notice was sent. The barrister tried to interrupt twice. Each time the judge told him to sit. Camilla continued. I hid in the vestry, she said, because my guardian had drugged me, declared me dead, and prepared a burial in my name. Had I appeared alone and immediately, she would have called me delirious before any person of standing could testify to what she had done. I waited for witnesses. I waited until the lie had an audience. Violetta shot to her feet. She is raving! Camilla did not turn. The judge's gaze sharpened. You claim the coffin was empty before the congregation? Yes, my lord. You have a witness of rank to that fact. A chair scraped behind her. I witnessed it. The voice filled the room. Augustus stood. He did not stride forward. He did not place a hand on Camilla's shoulder. He remained behind her chair, exactly where he had chosen to be. Identify yourself, the judge said. Augustus, Duke of Stonehaven. The title moved through the gallery like wind over grass. I attended the funeral in disguise, Augustus said. I did so because a former servant of the Pembroke household brought me word that no physician had been allowed to view Miss Pembroke, and that Mrs. Sinclair meant to bury with suspicious haste. I lifted the coffin lid before the rector and the congregation. I swear under oath that the coffin was empty. Violetta's hands gripped the bench before her. The lie which had seemed so large in drawing rooms struck the Duke's testimony and cracked. Augustus sat. Camilla felt the floor return to her. Furthermore, my lord, she said, drawing the tied papers forward. I have sworn statements from 2 servants, dismissed after questioning my supposed fever. I have copies of the trust accounts. I have the names of the girls turned away from the Pembroke school after funds were diverted. She placed the first paper before the court, then the next, and the next. For 20 minutes, Camilla dismantled her own burial. Not with tears, not with pleading, with dates, names, sums, clauses, and the steady voice of a living woman refusing to be folded into silence. When she finished, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The judge looked at Violetta, then at Camilla. "The petition is refused," he said. "This court will not issue a commission against Miss Pembroke. An inquiry shall be opened into the false notice of death and the handling of the Pembroke Trust. Miss Pembroke is competent to administer the trust established by her father." Violetta made a sound as if she had been struck. She tried to move toward the aisle. Augustus stood. One step placed him between her and the doors. "Not until Miss Pembroke has left the room," he said. Softly. "Enough." Violetta stopped. Camilla gathered her papers herself. Humphrey offered his arm. She took it for the sake of his kindness, not because she needed holding upright. As she passed Violetta, her aunt whispered, "You ungrateful girl." Camilla paused. For the first time that day, she looked directly at her. "No," she said, "only living." Then she walked out of the court, under her own name. Weeks later, autumn settled over Essex with the smell of wood smoke and wet leaves. Camilla walked down the parish lane toward the old Pembroke schoolroom. She wore a dark blue pelisse instead of mourning black. The colour still startled her when she saw it at the edge of her vision. Around her wrist, the black ribbon remained, but now the brass key rested openly against the fabric of her glove. Not hidden, not bitten into her palm, carried. The schoolhouse stood beyond the churchyard wall, its oak door weathered, its windows clouded with dust. Once girls had recited sums there in thin voices, while Camilla's father listened from the doorway with quiet pride. After his death, Violetta had closed it temporarily. Temporary had lasted 3 years. Camilla stopped before the door. A shadow moved beneath the old oak near the gate. Augustus stepped into the light. He wore no disguise today. His dark coat was immaculate, his cravat severe, his boots polished. Yet there was something different in the way he stopped a few feet from the threshold. He did not presume to cross. "I heard the coffin satin was cut into squares," he said. A small smile touched his mouth. Camilla's own warmth surprised her. "I sent it to the parish poorhouse for linings. It seemed the first honest use Violetta had made of that coffin." Augustus laughed softly. The sound changed his face, not softened into someone else, only unguarded. For a moment she saw the man beneath the storm. He looked toward the schoolhouse. "Clement Bexley confessed to me yesterday." "The old footman?" "He said he kept that servant's coat for years, the one I wore to the church. He kept it because you once stopped Violetta from dismissing him without a character after he broke a lamp." Camilla looked down, remembering. He had not broken it. Estella had. He remembered that too, Augustus said. He remembered the young lady who protected a servant no one else would hear. That is why he rode to me when he heard of the funeral. That is why he gave me the coat and told me which side door would be unlatched. The circle closed so gently that Camilla almost did not feel it until it was complete. A kindness she had forgotten had returned to her in black servant's wool. She looked at Augustus. "So I saved myself by being troublesome years ago." "You saved yourself," he said. The rest of us merely arrived late enough to be useful.
Her throat tightened. This time the feeling did not frighten her. Camilla lifted the brass key and slipped it into the schoolroom lock. It resisted. For 1 second, the old fear moved through her, locked doors, dark rooms, someone else deciding when she might come out. Then Augustus stepped closer, not touching her, only near. For the first time in her life, a man strong enough to break any barrier chose to stand still and leave the freedom in her hands. Camilla turned the key. The lock yielded with a satisfying click. Sunlight entered first when she pushed the door open. Dust shivered in the air. Empty benches stood in rows. A cracked slate lay on the front table. The room smelled of chalk, old wood, and beginning again. Camilla stood on the threshold. Then she turned back and held out her hand. The brass key rested in her palm. Augustus looked at it, then at her. He did not take the key. He took her fingers. Warmth closed around her hand. Steady, anchoring, waiting. "May I enter, Miss Pembroke?" he asked. Camilla looked into the room her father had left her, the room her aunt had tried to steal, the room she had opened herself. Then she looked at the man who had broken a door for her, and learned for her sake when not to break another. "Yes," she said. This time, no one opened the door for Camilla Pembroke. She opened it herself, and chose who might enter.